Kia ora mai tātou, tēnā tātou katoa. Members, the House and Committee is resumed. Prior to the dinner break, we were debating the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement Amendment Bill. All parts, schedules, clauses are being taken as one question for the purposes of debate. Dr. Megan Woods has the call and has 3 minutes remaining.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Chairman, always a pleasure to take a call split by the dinner break. But when we last tuned in, Mr. Chairman, I was outlining how Labor had always been a party that supported free trade. But what we have in front of us today isn't about trade. What we have in front of us is some enabling legislation for something that goes much broader than that. And my colleagues before the dinner break have touched on several of Labor's concerns and objections to this legislation. The Honourable Annette King before the dinner break was talking about our concerns in regard to Farm Act as well as other areas, and the ability of New Zealand to have the kind of health system that we want to have with the kinds of restrictions around, with the kind of expansions put around patents under this, and in particular our ability to be able to afford the next generation biologic drugs that we will need. We've already seen that we are starting to need these in our country. But Mr. Speaker, one of the things that has also stood at the centre of Labor's inability to support this agreement and the subsequent legislation that we're here debating today is that when you looked at it, the case just didn't stack up. We were sold by Minister Grosser when he was going off to negotiate this, what the huge benefit to New Zealand was going to be. But Mr. Chairman, when the national interest analysis that accompanied this treaty came back, we saw in stark reality what it did mean. Was it going to be the huge win for dairy that the Minister said it always had to be, or he was going to walk away from this, Mr. Chairman? No, it wasn't that huge win for dairy. Instead, we saw very minor gains for dairy. We saw that the increased access, not the profit, would be the equivalent only to the output of 3 large dairy by 230 farms. Begs the question is why he didn't walk away. The gains that were promised simply weren't there. But more than there just not being the gains, that there were some alarming analyses that were undertaken. We have a look at the analysis that was undertaken by Tufts University that talked about how this could be that 6,000 jobs within New Zealand could actually be lost because of this legislation. So not only would New Zealand be not making the gains that were originally sold when people first came to look at the idea of the TPP, but actually some people would be worse off. And it is, as the Honourable Annette King said, when this idea of the TPP first came up, there were lots of people that thought this could be good, let's have a look what it has to offer for New Zealand. But the simple and stark reality, Mr. Chairman, is that, Mr. Chairman,
Dr. Megan Woods.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, is that it just didn't pan out. Now, I know that everyone will be remembering before the dinner break, I said that I was specifically going to talk to Part 7 of this legislation, in particular clauses 66 to 70. And these are the clauses, Mr. Chairman, that amend the Overseas Investment Act of 2005. So what it does is clause 69 would insert a new section 61A and provide regulation-making powers to implement alternative instrument screening thresholds for overseas investment in significant business assets. So under the agreement and under the most favoured nation obligations and certain international agreements listed in the new clause 61A in this legislation, the threshold above which an overseas person must get approval to invest in significant business assets in New Zealand must increase from 100 million to 200 for non-government investors from parties to those agreements. I could go on, but I won't, Mr. Chairman, in terms of reading from there of the description. But what is contained in these clauses 66 to 70 is what the government didn't stand up for New Zealand, and Tim Grosser didn't stand up for New Zealand when he was off doing the hard negotiations around this. So when he came back and said that we simply couldn't put the protections so that we wouldn't lose the ability to restrict the sale to foreign investors of our homes and our farms and our businesses, he said it couldn't be done. simply couldn't be done. But Mr Chairman, what the reality that New Zealanders have to face is that our government didn't fight for us in the way that other governments fought for their countries. So when Tim Grosser said that you couldn't do it, well, other countries did. Other countries did exactly that. Australia did that. Singapore did that. Other countries got agreement that there would be the ability to put those kind of restrictions in place. But where, Mr Chairman, where in clauses 66 to 70 is there the evidence that our government stood up for us as New Zealanders when they were negotiating this agreement? It is nowhere. That is the answer to that. It simply isn't in that, because that is not something that this government was interested in doing. And it is that it should have stood up for New Zealanders, and they simply did not. So then we had that Minister Grosser said it simply couldn't be renegotiated, but we have people around the world now saying it would. So, Mr Chairman, there are a number of issues that have been brought up around this, and Grant Robertson brought up as a point of order at the beginning of this debate around the clause that is actually dependent on something that we don't know that is going to happen, Mr Chairman, and we wait with bated breath to find out whether or not that is indeed in order. Because we are all going to be glued to our seats tomorrow to find out what the outcomes in the states are. But the reality is, Mr Chairman, is that both candidates in the US presidential elections have said they are not in favour of this agreement. So why is it that New Zealand is steamrolling ahead, putting in place this enabling legislation for a treaty that we don't even know is going to pass the threshold? Because if the United States isn't going to come to the party on it, Mr Chairman, then it is a dead duck itself, that it will not get over the line. So I would like to hear from the Minister and the Chair exactly why it is that we are pushing ahead at the pace we are when we don't know the context in which we're going to be dealing with and whether it is even going to be required, Mr Chairman. So when we look at this Trans-Pacific Partnership, we can see the government has promised so much from it. But what we're seeing here today is a government that now just wants to be quiet at every turn around it. They tell us that it's going to be the boon for business. They have small businesses telling them that they are not in favour of it. Just over a third of small businesses actually want to see the Trans-Pacific Partnership enacted. The rhetoric simply has not stepped up with the reality and with the analyses. And this is why Labor, a party that does back genuine free trade, where it can be shown to have a benefit to New Zealanders, is unable to support this legislation that would be the enabling legislation for the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. And that is something that we will stand by and stand up for New Zealanders on, Mr Chairman.
Fletcher Tabuto.
For the opportunity, sir. I thought I'd start